won't. I am your president.
No. It's not true. That's impossible.
Search your feelings. You know it to be true.
No! No!
Won't. I am your president.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the following program. I'm your host, Joe Neerman, a.k.a. Good Lawgic. There's Mark Hamill. Not too happy. Not too happy. I guess that's one thing that Donald Trump has in common with Darth Vader that he said that the left says he is, and that is he's Mark Hamill's daddy. I hope your day is going well. Mine is going really well. Mine is going really well. Yes, I'll admit it. Fantasy football was successful. It's definitely a part of my mood here. It was a really big win. It's an important win. It was a tough win. It was all the way down to the last minute of the game kind of win. So yeah. But at the end of the day, it's a win. And frankly, I feel very proud of the way I played certain things this week. But I'm not going to bother you all. I'm not going to bother you with that detail. You don't care about that stuff. You want me to get down into the legal end of things, the politics of things, and get down into all that good stuff. So I'm going to start off with something that I didn't have referenced in my thumbnail description anywhere there. And that is a story that came out today with Elon Musk announcing that he is now, we're actually making a filing, in the Alex Jones bankruptcy. We all know that he filed a notice of entry, that he wanted to join the case a week ago. A lot of people were struggling to speculate what role Elon Musk was planning on taking in that capacity. And we got the answer to that in a filing that came out today. Specifically, the reason he came in is he was objecting to the sale or transfer of accounts maintained by Alex Jones or InfoWars in his court filing. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this filing. I did look through it relatively quickly, but just doing a quick snapshot of what this is rather than just actually read this thing. Let's pull up the actual filing here so we can get a little bit of a feel for it. It's not very long. I'm going to be spending, it's really 14 pages plus a whole lot of exhibits. I'm not going to be going through the 14 pages with you. So I'm not going to be doing that. I'm just going to tell you that when they filed today in bankruptcy court, the purpose of their filing is to file an objection to the sale of Alex Jones' X accounts, whether it's his real Alex Jones account or the InfoWars account, that the trustee should not be entitled to sell those assets. You can understand why they would want to sell those assets, why his political enemies, Alex Jones specifically, political enemies, who, let's face it, are likely enemies of Elon Musk as well, would love to take his account and sell it to someone who would be able to get whatever thrill they can in making Alex Jones look like a clown. And Elon Musk ain't having it. He's like, no, you don't have a legal right to do that because you don't have ownership of that. Alex Jones doesn't have the ownership of it. He's just a licensee. He is a license to use something that belongs to us. And what he has is based on the terms of service that he signed off on and InfoWars signed off on when they first joined on. You can't just be like, oh, you now have a greater power. You now have a greater power because than the person who possesses something. So whatever level of power that they have, the most you can do as a creditor is step into their shoes. You cannot enrich their power to be able to use it in ways that the original owner would not have a license to use. And that's essentially the point that Elon Musk, and really, let's face it, it's technically X Corp is making here, where they say X Corp hereby files this limited objection to the notice of successful bidder and backup bidder in the auction for the assets of Free Speech Systems LLC, free and clear of any all claims, interests, and encumbrances. And we're just going to look quickly through the preliminary statement where they say, in particular, X Corp objects to the sale, assignment, to transfer of the InfoWars X account, which is x.com/Infowars, the banned video X account, which is also owned by Alex Jones, and they also have a judgment against them as well, I believe. The War Room X account, the Alex Jones X account, and any other accounts maintained by FSS, which I guess that's the FSS is the Free Speech Systems LLC that belongs to Alex Jones. And what their point here is that under the terms of service, all right, title, and interest in and to X Corp services, including X Corp's various websites, SMS, APIs, email notifications, applications, buttons, widgets, etc., services, they all belong to X. All that stuff. All that stuff belongs to X exclusively. Now, X, as the owner of X services, grants each user a personal, worldwide, royalty-free, non-assignable. You cannot assign it. No one can assign it. If Alex can't assign it, no one else can assign it. And non-exclusive license to the software provided. And in contrast to the services, the account holders own the content. So what they post up there, that belongs to them. That's their own creation. If you write something on X, the license to the ownership of that, if you write a book on X, you're obtaining the ownership of that by writing it there. But the actual account itself belongs to X. And then you just have a license to use it, but you don't have an ownership interest in it. And a lack of an ownership interest and a lack of a right to assign your license prevents Alex Jones from being able to transfer that account to someone for money. And similarly, someone who's stepping into his shoes as a creditor does not all of a sudden attain that jurisdiction. Pursuant to successful bidder notice of sale motion, to the extent applicable, the sale motion, the trustee now seeks to contravene X Corp's terms of service by improperly selling or otherwise transferring the X accounts, which neither Jones nor his bankruptcy estate own, to some third party. And while X takes no position on the sale of any content, because content belongs to Alex Jones, so if he creates something, if he creates a video and uploads it into X, well, that has a value to it. That you could sell. We're not saying we own that. That's content that he creates. That content belongs to Alex Jones. That would be something that a trustee could sell, take possession of from Jones, because Jones owns that, this content. The X Corp is the sole owner of the services being sold as part of the sale of the X accounts. And while X Corp has gained account holders has granted account holders such as Jones and FSS a license to the services, that license is not assignable, both under the terms of the service and applicable non-bankruptcy law. So the trustee must not be permitted to undermine X Corp's rightful ownership of the property licensed to FSS, Jones, or any other account holder on the X platform. And that's why they're coming on in here. Frankly, I barely looked past, page 3 of this whole thing. I'll tell you intuitively, I'm not a bankruptcy attorney. So you all know that. Let's get that out of the way. But intuitively, what they're arguing makes a lot of sense. Under bankruptcy law, you cannot just ignore the contracts that were executed by the creditors prior to their bankruptcy. Sometimes, in certain circumstances, those contracts can be somewhat set aside if they look like they were done fraudulently for the purposes of defrauding creditors. But that's just not a realistic type of claim when you're talking about a company like X. First of all, they need to be close in proximal time to when the bankruptcy occurs, or to some triggering event like the judgment occurring, where it's foreseeable that there's going to be a massive judgment coming against him. So in those circumstances, we do see bankruptcy courts sometimes vitiate otherwise secure contractual rights. But the reason that they'll vitiate is because it's like the reason that you're entering into this contract is to try and frustrate and defraud creditors. That's obviously not happening when that's just a blanket rule that that X has with hundreds of millions, if not billions, of different users. It's the same terms. So that being the case, also when you consider proximal time, that the X accounts that he formulated were was like a decade before there was any sort of triggering event like a judgment or a bankruptcy filing. So it's very evident that those contractual terms under bankruptcy law, as far as anyone can see looking from the outside in, they should be binding on the trustee. They should impair the trustee, stop the trustee from being able to sell or force any sort of foreclosure sale, judgment foreclosure sale of the X accounts. Again, content that's up there, they could sell in theory if someone's interested in buying some video he put out 3 years ago, which maybe they would be. I don't know. There might be some commercial value to it. But the actual accounts themselves, like the real Alex Jones account, is something that X is saying, we're standing behind Alex Jones, that cannot be seized by a trustee and sold. That's going to continue to belong to Alex Jones or its original licensee. In each case, as there's InfoWars all under the FSS, the Free Speech Systems corporate entity that Alex Jones owns. So there you go. But it's just a license. So even if you got a judgment against them, you could not take that from him and move it. You can't transfer it because that's the contract restricts that. It's a very interesting filing by X. I think it looks pretty legally sound, and I think that Elon's going to succeed in keeping a trustee from being able to sell those assets, sell real Alex Jones account or the InfoWars account, Banned Videos account. Those accounts I do not believe are good. I think the judge is going to agree with X Corp on this one, and that Elon is going to succeed there. We should anticipate that. That's my prediction. I don't know. I'm just telling you that's what I see happening. What we got here? Oh, well, Joe, I blew you out on the first game. He did blow me out the first game. And you got me in this one. Congratulations. You see, the reason why this one was significant is A, we were both 6-5, and now I'm 7-5, and you're 6-6. So that's a big deal. That was one reason it's a big deal. And the other reason it's a big deal is because there's so much parity in our league that I'm actually vying for like one of the top 2 seeds, which would be actually kind of crazy considering I think the best record anyone had was like 7-4. I don't remember. So yeah. I'm catching up. But no one wants to hear about that. Douche NATO. We're going to get to NATO. We are going to talk about NATO and what a disaster they are. We could probably move over there now. Should we go there now? Should we go to the story now? Yeah, why not? Okay. 2 things as far as what NATO and the EU or members of the EU are doing right now with respect to the threat of an incoming Trump presidency, I guess, or escalating tensions in Europe between Ukraine and Russia. So, first and foremost, the Post put out an article, which actually came up when we were on X Space earlier today, which said the top NATO military chair warns business leaders to prepare for a wartime scenario. What the hell does that even mean, a wartime scenario? Well, chair of NATO's military committee warned business leaders to prepare for a wartime scenario and bring their production lines back home rather than relying on China or Russia to avoid blackmail or sabotage, as former and future U.S. President Donald Trump has vowed to restore his America First agenda. What? Prepare for a wartime scenario? What does that even mean? Speaking at an event Monday for the European Policy Center think tank, Dutch Admiral Rob Bauer, whoever the hell that is, said Instability in global politics could leave businesses at the mercy of foreign governments, especially if war were to break out. Businesses need to be prepared for a wartime scenario and adjust their production and distribution lines accordingly, Bauer said, because while it may be the military who wins battles, it's the economies that win wars. Well, you could say this, you could have written this or penned that at any time in the last 75 years, I guess, that at any time there could be war. You're saying because these America First agenda that there's more likely there's going to be a war? I don't understand what this means. Why is there more likely to be war when we bring in a president who's been a president of peace? The NATO military chair said Europe had already gotten a taste of this over the tumultuous Gazprom fuel deal, the terms of which Russian President Vladimir Putin stepped in to change following the EU's backing of Ukraine in 2022. We thought we had a deal with Gazprom, but we've actually had a deal with Mr. Putin, Bauer said. And the same goes for Chinese-owned infrastructure and goods. We actually have a deal with Chinese President Xi. The NATO military chief noted that 60% of all Earth materials are produced in China, with 90% of the products also processed there. The bulk of ingredients for critical healthcare items, including sedatives, antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, and low blood pressure medicines, all come from China as well, Bauer said. Seems like this is not a good situation because if we go into war with them, they could have us at their mercy. He warned that it would be naive for business leaders to believe that the Chinese Communist Party would not stoop to targeting foreign business in its country to disrupt the economies of potential adversaries. The dire warning comes as Trump has vowed to prioritize America First agenda, which could include setting 60% tariffs on most goods imported from China in an effort to protect domestic industries. We're going to talk more about those tariffs shortly. Economists expect the policy to start exactly early next year with 40% tariffs on imports, which would be a significant blow to China. The incoming president also claimed his first call from Oval Office would be to his Chinese counterpart to demand he follow through on a $50 billion farming deal. If you may have forgotten this, but in 2019, Trump worked a farming deal which Xi has really not lived up to. And America has done nothing to actually enforce that they live up to it. So he's going to hit him up on his $50 billion farming deal. The deal made during Trump's tariff negotiations in his first term called on China to purchase $50 billion worth of American agricultural goods, on which he claimed Xi has failed to follow through, only because he has. Experts say Trump's plan would hinder Chinese economic plan for 2025 by a whole percentage point. It remains unclear how Beijing may respond. During the event Monday, Bauer also called on Trump and European leaders not to end the conflict. No. Why should we end wars? Oh, my God. Why should we end wars? It would be a dangerous precedent for Moscow and Beijing to do as they please against the West. Doofus. These war hawks. These war hawks are always so excited to send everyone else into war. Dutch Admiral Bauer. Are you going to be commanding? Are you going to be commanding your fleets up against Russia? Are you going to be doing that? You're going to be going into the Yangtze? Are you going to be doing it? It's going to be America, or some proxy who America basically is funding. Are you going to be the one funding it? Is it going to come from your tax dollars, Dutch Admiral Bauer? While on the campaign trail, Trump suggested a diplomatic end to the war that includes Russia being allowed to keep the territory it has invaded, which would be a significant win for Putin. Oh, boo-hoo. Oh, boo-hoo. Oh, no. Well, you know what? Maybe you should have resolved this 3 years ago. Moscow currently controls about one-fifth of Ukraine after launching its invasion in February 2022, including Crimea and the vast majority of Donbass, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions. They've had Crimea since 2014. So, not sure what you're talking about there. In case you're unfamiliar with the whole Crimea situation, which you really should be a little bit more familiar with the Crimea situation. If we pull up a map of Crimea here, do I have a map of Crimea sitting here? Oh, hell no. It's important to look at a map when you're getting like a feel for what's happening here in this region, because the map is really important. Okay. This map gonna be good? Okay. We'll get there in a moment. We must save Ukraine at all costs, even if it means our very lives. Why? Because Ukraine represents everything that democracy is and should be. There you go. Exactly. 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 Send them your wives, your children. That's what we have to do right now. There's no other way. There's no other way that's democratic. That's for sure. That's one thing we all know. It's not, no other outcome is democratic. I'm trying to find a good map here, which will help show. Which will show. All right. Why is YouTube linking the AP on the 2024 election in this video? I can't even begin to imagine. I cannot even begin to imagine. Well, but with respect to the whole Crimea thing, yeah, I'm not finding a map I really like here. Sort of get a little bit of a feel for it here. I don't like this map. Tag now it. All right. In 2014, after there was a coup in Ukraine, whereby prior to 2014, there was the leader of Ukraine was sympathetic to Russia, had very strong Russian sympathies, and they had no problem with Russia basically using Crimea as a naval port for itself. Russia has ports on their eastern flank, which is the Pacific Ocean, and also in Crimea. The problem with their ports on the eastern flank is that somewhere between 6 and 9 months of the year, those ports are frozen in. You try going there late, next month, and no boats are going through there because those ports it's so cold there that those ports are all frozen in for like half a year. So if they're not frozen in already right now, the reason Crimea is so important to Russia is because it's a warm weather port, meaning that water doesn't freeze up in the winter. And since it doesn't freeze up in the winter, they can actually move their naval ships, submarines, etc., in and out of their base and actually have them be usable if they're in a scenario where they need to use them. So as soon as there was the uprising in Ukraine, Russia went into Crimea and took it over with what many would think is kind of what they certainly felt was a necessary military objective of securing a port for themselves, which would enable them not to have to put their navy on ice literally for half a year every year. So that's why they went into Crimea. Around the same time in the Donbass region, Luhansk regions, there was this whole separatist movement because it's populated by a significant percentage of Russians. And Russians and Ukrainians, while to most Americans, they seem to be very similar. Apparently, there are genetic and cultural distinctions between them, which make them easy to distinguish themselves one from another. And apparently there's a pretty marked distinction between them. I've said for the longest time that this conflict in the Ukraine has never ever been about anything other than economic bases. Now, when I was talking on Spaces earlier today, there's a guy, Jim Fapp, who was there, who I happen to respect. He's a very intelligent guy who made the fair counterpoint that every war ultimately is economic. That's true, but the question is it economic for both sides, or is it not, or are there other factors that are playing in there? Is it, in other words, America, when we tend to go to war, if you look through every war we've gone through since World War II, and including technically World War II and World War I, but every global interventionist war that we've been involved in, every war not in North America, whether you're talking World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, you look at everything that happened in our involvement in Middle Eastern affairs, you look at our involvement in both Gulf Wars, all of them ultimately, in each of them, the claim that was made every single time, the claim that was made was this was about American virtue, which it wasn't. We all believed it. We as Americans believed it. That's the bill of goods that was being sold to us by our governmental leaders, but that was never, ever the case. That's how they sold it to us. We all believed it for decades. And frankly, I do think that World War I and World War II were for virtuous bases. In other words, there's concern that if Germany would have unfettered reign, that they ultimately would, that there's sort of a self-defense element to it, if not the virtue of democracy. The whole domino theory that got us embroiled in the Korean War and the Vietnamese War was insane. It doesn't even it makes no sense when you think about what domino theory is. It was ultimately disproven by people who actually have a brain. If you're unfamiliar with the term domino theory, this was what was going on in the 50s and 60s, where there was a notion that political strategists were saying, which is there's a whole bunch of countries in the Far East which are starting to embrace communism. And once one country embraces communism, another country will, and another, and another, and another. And they're going to fall like dominoes, and all of them will start becoming communists. Okay, let's say that's true. Let's say that one communist country breeds another communist country. So what? Okay. Does that mean now they become some sort of threat to America because they become a communist country? Cuba is a communist country which is 90 miles off the coast of Florida. That doesn't seem to have much of an impact on us. But although Cuba at that time was not, that's before Fidel Castro. That's a few years before Fidel Castro. Not a lot, but a couple of years, and it never made any sense because, frankly, if you actually believe that communism is evil and corrupt and self-destructive, which it is, and it is, and it is, you shouldn't be worried about countries turning to communism because in a couple of short decades, they're going to learn fast how terrible those policies are. They'll be the beacon to the world. It's like, oh my God, look at the disaster of communism. This is terrible. And no one's going to embrace it. So instead of the testing zone being locally, domestically, or even on some country that's on your shores, it's like in the Far East. What the hell are you worrying about here? Why are you getting involved? But there were economic bases for them to get involved. And the framing of it is that communism represents pure evil, or I guess anti-Christian values or something like that, which it does. It does. But there's plenty of anti-Christian countries across the globe. We don't go to war with them because they're anti-Christian or anti-faith. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. None of it made any sense. But if you look at it from an economic perspective as to how we could actually use these countries as vassals, or you could look at it as an opportunity for our military-industrial complex to get rich, well then, hey, yeah, a lot of this makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot more sense from that perspective as to why America would be motivated to go into these different countries. And you could apply that logic to the Gulf War, the Iraqi War, Afghanistan. You could apply it to all of these conflicts. At the time that we went in there, most Americans were on board and trusting of our government. And of what the legacy media kept telling us is like America equals good, opponents equal evil. And that was the framing that we have had forever. America is good, virtuous. Anything that is against that is inherently evil. George W. Bush even referred to anyone who is standing against America as being the axis of evil. Axis being a borrowed term from a reference to our enemies in World War II. And basically, you can have this amorphous axis of evil. Now, no one should mistakenly misunderstand or misinterpret my words here to say that I'm saying that these folks were good people. No, they weren't. There's a lot of terrible people in the world. We don't have to go to war with all of them. But you have an incentive to go to war with them if, I don't know, if your military industrial complex is if you're sitting there as a politician, you're a congressman, you're a senator, you're a president, and you're getting all sorts of funding from these big, massive companies who are basically saying to you, hey, you know what, maybe we should, maybe like those people are bad, and we should try and show them that we're the real boss here and go on in there, flex our muscle because they're really evil. And it's really easy to sell people on how evil they are because as it happens, they are kind of evil. But it's not about us being the good guys because there's a lot of evil people out there. Newsflash, a lot of evil people. Anyhow, yeah. So, and there was a whole explanation that I played here of RFK pointing out that the expansion of NATO. Why are we expanding NATO? Why do we need to have these tiny little countries? These little 2-bit rundown countries that neither you or I would ever want to move to in Eastern Europe. Why is it that we need to expand into them, that they become part of NATO? Are they big global players? Are they significant? Are they going to actually, is their will? I mean, do you even know where Estonia is? That you do care if Latvia is in NATO? Like, oh wow, big win for NATO today. We got Latvia. No one cares about these countries. They don't have the financial or military might to actually be significant beneficial. Quite the contrary. All it means is we have to spend more money to ensure that we're protecting them. It's literally it's unimaginable. I guess it's technically, I don't know, 100 miles, or they would say 150 kilometers closer to Moscow. Okay. It's very, very aggravating. Very, very aggravating. All the funding from NATO, or the vast majority of it, has been coming from America for God knows how long. That's what Trump was complaining about in his first term, saying, hey, you guys in the EU need to start ponying up your fair share here. And basically, why is he the one saying that instead of America taking care of them? Well, you know what? Maybe it's just because, he's not someone who's being paid off by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin or all these other different military, massive, multinational, multi-billionaire, trillionaire companies which are producing these weapons of mass destruction and want to basically have a buyer. And the more NATO members you have, the more goods get sold if you're in the military industrial complex. So that seems like a pretty significant motivation, because I can't figure out any other reason to bring Latvia into NATO unless it's just we need to get more money into Lockheed. You tell me, because I can't think of any. All of this ultimately is about the economics. That's all this has ever been about. And when the fight over Ukraine is because Ukraine happens to be A, very comfortably positioned between Russia and the EU, and B, ridiculously fertile soil that is arguably the most fertile soil on God's green earth. Some people even speculate that literally the Garden of Eden is located in Ukraine. So, yeah, that's why Ukraine is important. Not because they're all about democracy, because everyone knows they're a democratic country. I mean, I shouldn't say they're not a democratic country. I guess compared to CCP, they're a democratic country. But if you're able to cancel your elections at the drop of a hat because you're in the mood to do so, you're not any sort of constitutional republic that America should be like, oh, we need to stand up for this democracy. Although that should come with a caveat for me, because I would tell you right now that the fact that there's very little freedom of speech in Canada, UK, I don't know, anywhere outside of this country makes me question whether any of them are actually what is classically referred to as a democracy, or we would refer to as constitutional republic, because those are not free states. There is no freedom on this planet outside of America. So we're the last bastion of hope for freedom, because these countries are not free. Australia is not free. No, Canada is not free. Europe is not free. UK, they're ripping open doorways for what you post on Facebook, and just marching into your house, throwing you in prison for what you write on Facebook. I mean, talk about ridiculousness. In 2020, Australia is throwing. If one person sneezes in Australia, they shut down the whole country for a week. And I'm not. You think I'm exaggerating? I'm literally not. It's like literally like they're like, oh, there's a person. There was one person who tested positive here. We have to shut down the country for a week till we get rid of it. It's just insanity. So, yeah, these are not to my mind free places. These are not places I would ever want to live, because that's not freedom. I got people all over me about this dangling thing. I know. I'm getting a new one. All over. I can't get new headphones soon enough. In the last 3 days, I had so many people bring that up to me. All these chicken hawks think winning a nuke fight is feasible. Also, watch the Council on Future Conflict in 8:15-ish, 8:15-ish, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for all the info on conflicts to come. Thank you. Appreciate the heads up on that. We support you and your new pirate style earring. Okay, I get it. All right. It was a stylistic choice, okay? Crimeans voted to become part of the Russian Federation after the CIA backpedaled in 2014. 24, and it was CIA backed, by the way. It's not just CIA backed. They say the entire thing was pretty much a CIA operation where they motivated the public to just start a coup, and then just had no plan. To be honest, Russia has invaded Ukraine for 1, keep Ukraine out of NATO. Yep. 2, secure the oil and gas rich areas to keep Ukraine from challenging Russian oil supremacy in Europe. Yep. And yep. Like I said, it's about money and security. So you might want to say that makes Putin an evil guy. If I ever argue against that, everyone's like, "Oh, you're a Putin apologist. Oh, you don't recognize, you're using Russian speaking points." No, I can say he's very evil and still say someone can be very, very evil and still be acting the way you would act if you were in their position in a particular given circumstance. That's the point. It's not to say I'm not refuting any claims. I have no idea what his history is. I can go along with the claim, and frankly, I have no knowledge of this. But look, as a former KGB top official, I have to assume that this guy had to literally twist some thumbs in order to get where he's gotten, and probably done a lot worse. Okay, there are probably plenty of people who were tortured, killed, whatever, by Putin's own hands, if not by his command, by his physical hands. Okay, I can agree with you. He's a monster. But if he were replaced by someone who were not a monster, and that person was a normal, rational individual, a normal, rational individual may have done something very similar to what Putin did. And that's a horrifying thing for Americans to actually, who support the war in Ukraine, to actually come to grips with. That even if he were not a monster, and he was purely just saying, hey, I'm Russia first, I'm looking out for Russian interests, and this is a logical move for Russia. And he was not someone whose life, CV, and history are drenched in blood, but were actually just a normal, good person caring about Russia. He'd be like, we have to do this for our own security, for our own safety. That's not to say that Putin is that guy. But if you recognize that, hey, even someone who's rational and sane and reasonable and a genuinely good person sitting in that chair in the Kremlin might make pretty much the same decisions that Putin made, that makes you recognize maybe we need to sort of sort things out here in ways that are reasonable to all parties and are fair to all parties. That's my point. So you sort of have to step back from who he is as an individual into thinking like, okay, so what would a good leader of Russia do in his seat? You tell me, what would he do so differently? He'd be totally fine with NATO, with Ukraine joining NATO, and having all these nuclear weapons so close to him, and being strangled economically. He'd be fine with that. That's what a good Russian leader would do. I mean, come on. Domino theory is right. Laos Cambodia did fall communism. Our problem is that we managed war, not fight them to win them. It doesn't matter. That my point is, it doesn't matter. If the entire Far East became communist, who cares? Because communism cannot last for 3 generations. It cannot last. That godless, empty perspective of how a society should be enriched and made healthy and happy cannot possibly last. I'm going to tell you something. That's not my own quote. There's a very famous Jewish sage, arguably the most famous Jewish sage of the 20th century, was an individual by the name who was referred to as the Chafetz Chaim. His real name was Meir Kagan. He wrote a book called the Chafetz Chaim. I don't need to get into who he was as an individual. Just take my word for it that in the 20th century, he is the most significant rabbinical authority. And he died in the 30s, I believe, in 1930s. And he died in his 90s, shortly before World War II. And he was there in Europe during the fall of the Tsar. And he predicted when the Tsar fell that communism will be gone. That communism will be gone from Russia in 70 years. And they were like, why do you say that? He said, because it can't last more than 3 generations. And the logic behind this is that the first people are really the movers who start the whole thing off to a movement that is completely and thoroughly empty. They embrace it and they really believe it. And then but pretty quickly it starts to falter. And their children are embedded with this feeling. The second generation are embedded with a feeling of recognition, like, wow, this is what we were raised as, like, this is what's right and healthy and moral, and this is a good thing, but it's really not working well. So they end up having not nearly the same level of enthusiasm, but following in their parents' footsteps towards meeting that objective. When they try training the third generation sees that their parents don't really buy it. So and that's where the collapse ends up happening. If they have no chance or interest in giving that over as a legacy to the fourth generation. So that was the basis of his prediction. And it was clearly shown to be prescient because 1989, the wall falls down. So please get that dangling. I'm so angry about that. I can't even imagine how the conversation was going with that dangling. Oh my God. Putin told Clinton that Ukraine entering NATO would be a casus belli. Of course. Everyone knows this. Look, when the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know what the Cuban Missile Crisis is? Open a history book. Roughly 6.5 generations less than that, because you had JFK was in power. Yeah, the Cuban Missile Crisis, arguably the most presidential moment of JFK's career, was the Cuban Missile Crisis, where he stood up to the Russians and he basically said, "You dang well better get rid of those nukes that you have sitting there on Cuba, 90 miles away from the coast of Florida." Okay? 90 miles away from the coast of Florida. I need to just really get a freaking map here. How close is the border of Ukraine? Moscow. That's not the right way to go. Did it as the crow flies, meaning straight path, border of Ukraine to Moscow. Okay? Border of Ukraine to Moscow. As the crow flies, the border of Ukraine is approximately 490 kilometers, 300 miles from Moscow. You think that he can be okay with there being nuclear weapons 300 miles away? But they're going to be building bases of operations within 400 miles of Moscow? Unbelievable. I don't know what the hell they were thinking. Everyone, that's why it's casus belli. Casus belli is Latin term for belli from the Latin word for war. Cause of war. Casus belli. It's actually, you're right. Casus belli. It's the correct pronunciation. So, yeah. You can't have that. So we almost went to war when it was 90 miles from Florida. Okay? And that's like, in Florida to Washington is like another 700 miles. So when it was like 800 miles from Washington, we were like, no. 800 miles, by the way, in missiles that are flying whatever speed they can fly in 1960. Compare that to how fast missiles are able to go in 2024 and 300 miles. So we started our entire thing, the whole Cuban Missile Crisis, where it's like everyone's like, oh my God, this might be the start of World War III unless the Russians stand down, because we cannot. There's no. How the heck could we possibly have the Russians putting nukes in Cuba, facing towards America, 90 miles away from Florida, and only 700, 800 miles away from DC? That cannot happen. We said that in 1960, but in 2020, that Putin should be okay with Russia with missiles being 300 miles away from Moscow. Oh, come on, it's ridiculous. This is what I'm talking about as far as act reasonably. Just put yourself in the shoes of the other side. In fact, we can put ourselves in the shoes of the other side because we were on the other side during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we all know how we would react. Which Americans were living in terrified fear. I mean, this was almost the start of World War III when Russia did it to us from a further distance. But like, no, we have to bring them into NATO. Why? Why does that have to happen? Oh, well, the military-industrial complex really wants Ukraine. Oh, they happen to be a really natural resource-laden country. So obviously we have to have them. There's no sense. There's no logic to it at all. Sun Tzu said that mark of excellence is in essence is to win wars without fighting the battles. Apply it to the last 24 years, see how it shaped American populace opinion. It's an emotional point of view. Yeah. And you need to give me a little bit more detail on that. It may be time to upgrade headphones. Oh my God. This week. Okay? This week. I told you all, I'm waiting for Black Friday. Black Friday's coming. Black Friday's coming. The financial interests of Ukraine being bought by centralized banks, Monsanto and BlackRock, must be transferred over to the ownership of U.S. taxpayers. U.S. taxpayers must demand hold. See, this is the other thing also. So I started talking about this on Spaces today. It was a really interesting conversation that we're having on Spaces. This is my point as far as being America first. Okay, this is where I stand on this. There's no reason to look at the relationship between nations with each other and individuals with each other. Whenever you're assessing a relationship with others, a healthy relationship with others who are not, family, who are not kin. I'm talking about people that you meet, people that you have formed relationships with. It could be people you meet at school, at work, the gym. It doesn't matter. A healthy relationship is one where there's mutual respect, and each side has some sort of give and take that is even-handed and fair and reasonable. There's no reason that nations should have any sort of a different relationship with each other than that. That we all understand that each nation is doing the best they can for themselves individually, and that their primary objective is to look out for their own house. That's what you should be doing as a grown adult. You should be looking out for your own house first and foremost. You look out for your blood, you look out for your spouse, you look out for your parents or your kin. You might extend that laterally towards your siblings and family in that direction. That's your first obligation. But your first obligation is to under your own roof. And so too, it should be for all 190 countries across the globe. That every one of them, their primary interest and the interest of their leaders is their own country. That should be first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. The top 10 objectives should always be there, with nothing able to rise up into that top 10. All of them should be related towards bettering your own house. Now, part of that is having healthy relationships with others. A healthy relationship with others means that there's give and take with others, that there's social or sometimes commercial relationships that you form with others who are outside of your house, outside of your kin, outside of your blood. You're going to need to set that up in order to have a cohesive society. And it's good for you as an individual to be part of that society. It's good for your house to be part of that society. So you form social attachments with other people. This is something that you all know. Everyone knows this. I don't know why I have to explain this other than the fact to say everything you understand about how you and your individual life works and operates and should operate in a healthy way works for countries too. Which means that countries should not be warring with each other the same way you shouldn't be warring with your neighbors all the time. Quite the contrary. You should be able to resolve your issues amicably. You might not always get along. You might have some sort of issue or conflict. You should be able to resolve amicably. You probably might want to be doing business with some of them. You might want to have exchange of goods. That should happen between countries too. Once in a while, you might have a friend that says, look, I'm really, really having a tough time now. Is it possible I can borrow some money from you? That could happen sometimes. And depending on the nature of your relationship, you might say, okay, all right, when are you going to pay me back? That's what you're going to say. When will you pay me back? Depending on the nature of the relationship, you may not charge interest. Whatever it is, you probably give friendlier terms to someone you trust more. You might loan people money, okay? But you're not in a situation where you're gifting money to people outside from your house. All of a sudden, I'm going to be sending you several $1,000s, and that person thousands of dollars, and this other person thousands of dollars. Oh, and they'll come back to you 3 weeks later. I need more money. That's not a healthy relationship. These are people who are leeching from you. And you you learn this pretty quickly in your life. If you have someone who's coming over to you, who every 3 months is coming to you saying, I need more money from you, that's not a friend. That's not a friend. Because let's say you say, you know what, I'm not giving you money now. Are you not giving me my friend now? So the only reason you're my friend is because I'm giving you money. The only reason you're being my friend is because I'm taking care of you. And if I stop taking care of you, so you're out of here, you're done with this relationship is over, then you're not friends. And I've said this over and over again, that countries need to stand on their own 2 feet. And I'll tell you on this issue, someone came, so when I mentioned this on Spaces today, someone said to me, yeah, we need to defund Israel. And I said, you know what? I'm going to tell you something. If this is a policy America is willing to embrace with the entire world, I say, of course, Israel, along with everyone else. Yeah, Israel should stand on their own 2 feet, same way Ukraine should, same way Libya should, the same way Argentina should, the same way Australia should, and Canada should, and Israel should. All of them should, obviously. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Obviously. Then all of them should stand on their own 2 feet. You're grown. Not some fledglings. You're grown. Stand on your own 2 feet. That doesn't mean, so now, you might want to, they might come and say, hey, we need to buy weapons from you. I'd be like, oh, okay, fine, I'll sell it to you. You got to pay for them. That's going to come, it's not a free ride. We'll sell it to you at whatever, normal price is. I mean, it's very easy. This is something you do every day. Maybe you have, like with some people, if you have a business, right? So if you look at America as being a business, maybe you have like a friends and family discount of 5%, 10%, 15, 20%. It's not going to be more than 20%. Not going to be. So maybe you want to have something like that. Okay. But the same way you would not tolerate someone coming to your house and saying, I'm your friend, and I just had this calamity. So this calamity is whatever I think is a calamity. Maybe it is a real calamity. Maybe it's not. Maybe someone comes, imagine this. You have a friend who John, who basically his house got hit by a tornado. He's homeless now. You want to bring him in for a couple of weeks? Fine. You'd be fine with that, right? But that would not be every few months. That would be like a one-time thing that you're doing for a limited time, and you would sort of set out what your boundaries and zones are as to what's the plan for when I'm done with this. But what I'm saying is we don't take any sort of course of action like that. No, this is just like a lifetime investment that forever we are just going to be give. And here's the really gross part is the people who are authorizing giving away these gifts are not giving from their own pocket. They're taking from your pocket. They're taking from my pocket. That's whose pocket they're taking from. So we put them in charge of us and they're like, oh, okay, now I can just dig into that person's pocket and start gifting it away to people indefinitely. And that I think is wrong. So my point is there's no reason not to say that. Now, the thing I said to him at the same time was, I said, so if you're saying defund Israel, I'm like, okay, look, like I said, if you're saying that to everyone, of course I include Israel in that. But if I start saying this about defunding the world and your fixation is, well, we need to defund Israel, I have to ask, why is that where you're going first? What that's the one? Out of all the different crazy, stupid, retarded things that America wastes its money on, I just have to ask you tell me, the person who says that to me, why was that the first one you went to? Like, why is that? Like that, those $3 billion, that's the $3 billion that you're really upset about more than the billions of dollars that we send to other Middle Eastern countries or to Ukraine or to finance gender exchange studies in Uganda. This is the one you're really worried about. I'm willing to say totally fine, on board. It's all part of the whole global get America healthy, America first, take care of our own interests. Have a healthy relationship with everyone, which is mutually beneficial, mutual respect, understanding that each country is looking out for its own interests first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Now, when you tell me that the one thing that you can't wait to cut that cord is with Israel. I'm like, really? Why do you care about those dollars? Are those dollars like greener somehow? So that's what I'm just like, all right. I mean, I'm not passing. You tell me why that was the first thing you went to. So, yeah, that's but I it's a very simple, logical thing, because some people are like, no, we need to be globalists, we need to be interventionists, we need to figure out what's going on here. I'm going to tell you, Woodrow Wilson started this whole trend before when he got us into World War I, that America needs to be interventionist, we need to be globalists, we need to be the world police. That's where it started. Before that, we were never the world police. Woodrow Wilson started that policy off, and that basically became America's policy for the next century plus, and we can't get away from it. And other people are like, we need to be isolationists. We need to live in a cave. We basically need to say, forget about everyone else. Everything is made in America, born in America. No one comes to America. This is just our country. If you're not American, get the hell out of here. No, that's not a healthy way to look at it either. That doesn't make any sense. That's harming America. I mean, the reason you're part of a society is because it benefits you to be part of that society. I'm not saying that we should just, take our toys and go away. I'm simply saying, look at it as a freaking capitalist and say, you know what, we're willing to work with you. We'll sell you our goods. We'll buy from you. If you have good products to sell, we'll buy from you. We're looking to have a healthy relationship with you. We might have healthy dialogue. You might have certain ideas as to how we can better our systems. We might have ideas about how you better your systems. Let's be friends. It's just that actual friends don't need to pay someone to stay their friend. They're just friends. This is not complicated. It's something you all know, and you all, unless you're a psychopath or you're a sucker, unless you're some complete loser, this is how you deal with everyone you know. Why is it that this should not be how America deals with every country they know? It's very, very simple. It's very logical. It's very reasonable and fair. It's not extreme one way of globalization or isolationism. No, it's like, no, we're going to deal with everyone. We're just going to deal with mutual respect and understand that, hey, you know what? Our objective is take care of our citizens, our people right here at home first. And that should be your objective. And that doesn't mean that we're going to use that to basically that in that interest, we're basically going to be slaughtering you. It doesn't mean that. But we're going to be working, focusing here on bettering the lives of our citizens. That's what America First is, ultimately. So the reason I thought of it in the context of what Snuggle Struggle is talking about here is because at the end of the day, sometimes people might need us for something. And if someone wants to basically hire America, and America wants to get into the business of being like the world's mercenary, I could see that too. It's like, oh, okay, fine. You want America to intervene on your behalf? You want America to stand there as a big brother? All right. So what are you going to compensate us with? You need to compensate us for something. It's not a gift. So what are you going to compensate us with? What are you promising to give back to us? What are we going to end up getting for that investment that we're making in playing your bodyguard? And America could take that role. There's nothing unhealthy in that. There's nothing immoral in that. Because the notion of a moral war is an empty notion. Unless literally God tells you, go fight this war, there's no such thing as a moral war. And it's been quite a while since God actually gave that command to anyone. So, that being the case, there's no such thing as a moral war. So now you would tell me you want to get in the business of the war, in the warmongering business? Okay. I could actually see that would actually, if we really want to look at this in a hypothetical perspective, I could see that actually being a healthy direction. If you want, if you don't have a problem with the morality of engaging in war in general, you're telling me America wants to go down this road of saying, hey, look, a nation that's being threatened by someone is looking for some help, that we're willing to help them out. I'd be like, all right, well, what are they going to compensate us with? Maybe they have natural resources. Here's a great example. Okay, great example. A fight between two Muslim countries. And one of them is like, look, I want you to help me out over here. So then we need to sort of get down to terms. Like, what are you going to want from us? What are you expecting of us? How long is our involvement going to be here? What are you going to compensate us with? How much oil are we going to get from you? There's nothing wrong with that. We're selling our goods. The same way a mercenary would sell their goods. The same way the Russians were sending over Hessians here during the Revolutionary War. That happens sometimes. And I could see why a country would be like, hey, this is something we happen to be pretty good at. We're pretty good at war, so you might want our troops. Now, I don't know. It's the Biden administration, they've been doing everything possible to water down our military, make it sound like something that's a terrible thing, that basically, our soldiers, you compare them to Russian soldiers, it's like basically, I feel like I'm looking at Drago versus Charlie Chaplin here in a skirt. But assuming that our military is still up to snuff, and I'm not certainly looking to besmirch our armed forces, because I'm sure that anyone in the armed forces can kick the living tar out of me, and I genuinely appreciate their service. I'm simply saying I'm simply noticing how commercials seem to be focusing on how much we can actually weaken our armed forces. So I'm certainly not talking about any individual member of the armed forces that or you may be. I'm not talking about you. You could kick my butt, but I'm just saying, comparing to like the commercials for Russian forces, I saw a comparison there. I was like, they show Russian forces. It looks like some cool action movie heroes, like the Russian army, and then like the comparison is like the commercials for joining the military is some woman going, as the daughter, as my two moms always advised me, and being the child of a trans mom, I can appreciate the value of joining the military. It's just stop it. Like that's how we're pitching our military. But assuming that our war efforts are every bit as strong as American leadership would have us believe it is, which I'd like to hope it is. I don't know that it is, but I'd like to hope it is. And we want to get involved in that, go down that road, that we're going to be mercenaries for the world. All right. What are you going to compensate us with? It should be that simple. Every nation has something. There's something. Part of the advantage of being Alabama as opposed to being Ukraine is that you get those protections for free. That's part of the advantage. The Ukraine's not Alabama. They're not California. They're not even Hawaii. They don't get those protections for free. They're no sure any other country. That's a healthy relationship. And these are all things you know. The upgrade eyeglasses looks like MSNBC. Just stop it. I'm getting so much grief today. Hey, how are you, brother? Thank you for always being a good friend. Your counsel has been valuable and sage, but your friendship has been far more important. There are not good law tubers, but there is good logic. Peace. Thank you, brother. It's good to see you. Just give me a call. Granola Grin. Thank you for the chat. The above comment from Nick worries me. It shouldn't worry you. It's a nice thing. I don't know why that would worry anyone. I thought the dangly bit was you were doing your best impression of Rob Lowe's character from St. Elmo's Fire. Such an 80s earring icon. He was pretty impressive there. Russia isn't a communist country. Putin is not a communist. He and his wife are Russian Orthodox Christians, and over 25,000 Western Christians have moved there for religious freedom and non-woke. All right. You understand what I was saying. The original communism was, all right. You saw America Reagan died in 1931. I heard his prediction had more to do with Brysa about how every 7 years a new star rises to confuse navigators. Well, I heard the explanation I gave you. Hey, you! YSL trial almost over. I finally will have time for the first time in a year to watch your full stream. I'm so glad. Good to see you, Nick. Good to see you, Nick Stato. Read a history book. Every great story in history is dictators versus people. Read more history. I don't know if you're telling me or you tell my audience, but I've read a lot of history. Both of my parents were history teachers. Both of them. And they could not stop infusing history into me. I was literally about to post comment the Bay of Pigs, beat to the punch. The U.S. are being hypocrites about Ukraine. Yep. Wagner PMC made it nearly 60 miles from Moscow in less than a day before they stopped. There's no large natural between Ukraine and Moscow. You say there's no mountain range or anything like that. It's like just flatlands. It's like you just throw something up in the air 30 feet and just zip it out there. And nothing's stopping it. Yep. Joey coming boomer. Black Friday is not one day anymore. It's been going on for like a week already. Is it really? It's Black Friday already? Really? Okay. My dad was in the armed forces in 1960, too young for Korea, was a Minuteman missile tech. He told me it was a scary time for all, especially those in the silos. I'm sure it was. Because we wouldn't tolerate it. We wouldn't tolerate it at all. Wilson was a lot of bad things. First American interventionist isn't one of them. First time America boots were on front saw was 1805. I'll DM you a vid. In Europe? What are you going to talk about, like in Mexico? I'm talking about the War of 1812? Is that what you're going to talk to me about? All right. Where was we at? So, yeah. Following up on what I just shared with you here about how they're saying, how they're threatening that France and the EU, if you just joined recently. So I was covering this story here, how this Dutch admiral was warning EU businesses that, hey, you probably should be bringing home your businesses and making them domestic because we're coming to a wartime scenario here where you may be cut off from buying internationally. On top of that, DC Drano was sharing over how General Mike Flynn was reporting that France and England are threatening to send troops into Ukraine if Trump withdraws aid. So all I can say to this is, look, let's assume that General Flynn has his sources on this, that they are threatening to send troops into Ukraine if Trump withdraws aid. That would be a reason for America to basically say we're out of NATO. Because the idea, which first and foremost, I'm going to tell you this, they won't do it. There's no chance they'll do it. There's no chance in hell that they will do it. And I don't believe for a second that they would do it. And if I were Trump, I would tell them, if you do that, we are withdrawing from NATO because you're basically trying to poke the bear. You're trying to poke the bear. You're going to send in your own troops there? All right. We wish you well. We're out of NATO. Done with it. Because the whole point in NATO is that if Russia engages, any one of the members of NATO, that all the other NATOs are going to come to their side. Well, you're now engaging. You're deciding to bring NATO into this conflict. And that's ridiculous. I'm telling you right now, if I was Trump's advisor, I would tell him, you do that. That's your call. You can do that. You do that. We're withdrawing from NATO. We're done. And we're not part of your objectives here. Whatever ridiculous objectives you have of trying to go to war with Russia, we're not doing it. So if you want us out of NATO, go send troops in, because we're not gonna have your back on this one. It's that simple. Because think of how warped this is. That assuming this is accurate, I don't know that it is, but it's being reported that that's what General Mike Flynn is saying. So assume this is a pretty fair. DC Drano is a pretty good source, so I assume General Mike Flynn actually said this. So let's assume that this entire chain of information I'm relaying to you. So you're hearing it. Let's understand this. You're hearing it from Good Lawgic, who's hearing it from DC Drano, who's hearing it from General Mike Flynn. And General Mike Flynn is hearing from someone. That's what France and England are saying. So whatever grain of salt you think you need to attach to that chain of information, hopefully it's not true. But let's assume for a moment that it is true. How ridiculous is this? That's like someone basically being able to say to you, that's like your cousin. That's like your cousin saying, I'm going to start up with the mafia and you're going to have my back. You'd be like, are you out of your freaking mind? I know you're my cousin. No, I'm not doing that. Why are you starting with the mafia? No. I'm going to go with the war of the mafia. I'm really upset with them. You'd be like, that's ridiculous. I know you're my cousin. I really like you. I care about you. I want good things for you. But that's suicide, and it's stupid, and there's no basis for you to be going to war with the mafia over this. That's what you say, right? That's what anyone sane would say. And don't tell me that because I once signed a contract saying, hey, if anyone attacks you, I'm going to have your back, that now gives you license to attack others and then say, I need to have your back. Because that just doesn't make sense. That makes sense. Ridiculous. They're really desperate. This whole thing reveals their desperation to try and drag Trump into a nuclear war. That's what this ultimately is. They're trying to drag Trump into a nuclear war. I mean, how much more evidence do you need on this? So you can end up being a wartime presidency. They're trying to drag him in here. It's really gross. Soltron says, is Putin any more a monster than Biden? I don't know. All I know is what they say about him. I know a lot more about the monstrosities of Biden than I know Putin. So I'm not going to sit here making that comparison on an individual basis. My point when I was talking about Putin, which I think you got, was if he was replaced by someone who was not at all a monster, but just a normal Russian-loving Russian who has no history of monstrosity, evilness, has basically been taking care of Russian orphans his whole life and really loves Russia and worried about Russian interests, he might have done the exact same thing as what Putin did in this scenario. And that's a reason for us to sort of have pause here as to like, are we really the good guys? Are we really? But are we really? Because if you're, and this is what I mean by that, I want to expound on that a little bit. If you are a Russian, put yourself in the chair that you're now the head of Russia, the Russian Federation. You have to worry about your country's well-being, including their economic well-being. Part of it, and Russia is reportedly having all sorts of economic struggles. So part of what they want to do is they want to sell natural gas to the EU. The EU needs natural gas. America wants to sell natural gas to the EU. They don't like having competition from Russia. So they set up this pipeline and they build it across Ukraine, straight into Germany. Oh, we're going to take care of you. And the pipeline keeps getting bogged down. Finally, in this war, like smashed. So, and the audacity of American media to say, for some reason, Russia bombed its own pipeline. What? No. No one sane believes that. Oh, Russia just punched itself in the testicles. Why would anyone think that? Who would think such a thing? It doesn't make any sense. None of it makes any sense. So what I'm saying is, now if you're not Putin, you're Putin's replacement, and you're that whole Russian orphan-loving guy. You're like, we really need this for our economy. Why are you choking us? Why are you choking us from being able to sell our energy to the EU? And America's like, well, our companies want to sell it. So there'll be competition. So unbelievable. I don't know why I'm sending this the wrong thing. I clicked the wrong button. I'm going to stop sending this to Trump trial. I'm going to start sending this to